All right, guys. So as I mentioned in the previous lesson, right, the protests all really started because they were fighting for an end to racial injustice, primarily through police brutality, right? However, that's not really the only racial injustice that happens in this country. Um, so, just as I mentioned last time, the four officers responsible for George Floyd's death have been charged for murder and assisted murder. However, this isn't the only case, right, where this type of thing has happened. Just to let you know, uh, the officers involved already had previous complaints about their like brutality. Essentially, the Derek Chauvin, the officer who was responsible for George Floyd's death, or most responsible for George Floyd's death, um, had 17 complaints against him for uh, police brutality in the past. Right? Imagine how crazy that is. Right? Like if you work at any other job, okay, at any other job, and let's say McDonald's, right? Let's say you are a fry cook in the back at McDonald's and you've had 17 complaints from the customers saying that your food is something's wrong, right? Whether they're getting sick from it or something, right? You're doing something wrong. That's insane, right? You wouldn't have a job still if you had 17 complaints against you. First time, you probably get a warning. Second time, you probably would get some sort of consequence, probably in the form of pay, right? Third time, I'm very unlikely that you would still have a job, right? If three people have complained about uh, your work, then that's a problem, right? This guy has had 17 charges, right? There was another officer who was involved who actually had five charges. Five, not charges, sorry, these aren't charges. These are just complaints, right? Five complaints prior to this incident, yet somehow those officers were still allowed to be police officers, right? They were still on the street, um, able to end up having this competition with George Floyd, right? Or interaction with George Floyd. In addition to that, there's more than just police who are exhibiting racism in this country, right? Ahmaud Arbery is an African American man who was running recently, was running through his neighborhood, and two men essentially hunted, right? Followed him and ended up killing him. Uh, that sort of behavior, right? We have to think about where that comes from and whether, like, how far that really exists in our country, right? That we're only hearing about that case, but who's to say there aren't? Who's to say? Well, we actually know that there are definitely more instances like that happening in our country, right? The only thing is that, like, this incident was caught on camera, and that's why we know. So, what about all those other 17 complaints that Derek Chauvin had against him, right? Those weren't on camera, yet somehow, and that's why it's taken so long. It seems, right? In addition to all of this, 2 months ago, Breonna Taylor who was a 26-year-old EMT, had gone to bed after working a really long shift helping COVID-19 patients. She was shot, or her home was raided by the police with no warrants. They didn't knock on the door or anything. They came in and fired 22 bullets to her house, and she was actually shot 8 times and died. And those officers, there were three of them actually, were not charged. Most people didn't even know this had happened um, until now, right? Uh, so those police officers weren't charged with anything, and they were actually put on paid leave, which means they can stay home and still get paid, right? Uh, because of that, they aren't necessarily allowed to work as police officers right now, but they are still getting paid, right? And they're not being charged with anything. So those are a few examples of what's happening right now and kind of what the protesters are fighting for. Um, but again, I highly encourage you to look into these things on your own, right? Try to do some research and see what you find.